I was born in a winter that smelled like glue and vows. The factory stood on the edge of Budapest, where the tram bells sounded like tin. Prayers and the Danube carried secrets under a coat of fog. A man with carpenter's wrists and violinist fingers cut the hide that would become my skin. He worked in a silence that was not absence, but concentration, as if every stitch could redirect fate by a fraction of a millimeter. He pressed my corners into brass, like a captain fitting a ship for long water. He tested my lock and nodded once. "You will keep what others fear to keep," he murmured in a language of sawdust and smoke. I did not yet know what it meant to keep. On the 8th day, a diplomat lifted me from a row of brothers. His name was Andras Kovacs. He smelled of clean shirts, tobacco, and a decision taken too late. His shoes were polished like arguments. He ran a palm along my seam and smiled without teeth. "Reliable," he said to no one, to everyone. He placed papers inside me, first sheets that didn't crinkle because fear had pressed them flat. Then a small black notebook bound with a red thread. It was heavier than paper should be. The thread cut into the notebook's edge, the way a whispered name cuts into a room. We left at night. The station lamps swam in puddles, and the rails clicked like typewriter keys composing departures. I learned the language of trains, the lurch that separates talking from listening, the rhythm that teaches you time, even if you refuse clocks. Andras kept a hand on my handle while he read the notebook. Every page brought a tremor to his breath, the kind a man hides by coughing. Vienna first. Then a hotel that wanted to be invisible and failed. A glass of whiskey left wet rings on a knitstand. I waited on the rug like a dog that knows what not to bark at. A knock came as if the door owed money. A man in a trench coat stepped through the threshold and wiped rain from his hat with 2 fingers. Their conversation jumped languages the way a fox jumps fences. Hungarian to Russian to German and back again. I understood tone better than words. The tones were iron and ice. An envelope changed hands. It came to me, slid against my lining with a weight I felt in the hinges. I was learning weight is not only mass. Sometimes it is consequence. Berlin tasted like metal. The hotel window framed the checkpoint like a theater set that sold fear as realism. At 3 a.m, boots in the corridor, a fist on the door. I learned how a lock holds its breath. Andras shoved the notebook inside me, pressed my mouth shut, kissed my brass like a saint's toe, and slid me under the bed. The room filled with men who had been trained to see. They lifted mattresses, opened drawers, tapped walls for hollow promises. One of them knelt, his breath fogging the wood plank above me. He would have found me if he had believed in luck. He didn't. Andras performed outrage expertly. It's a dialect diplomats learn in school. When the men left, he pulled me out and said, "Friend, I learned another thing. Sometimes gratitude weighs more than guilt." Paris was supposed to be a cure, but cures are stories people tell each other by the river. She found us there, Elodie wearing a red dress that understood power better than laws. Her eyes were steady as countdowns. She laughed with Andras in daylight and unlocked me at night. She had a key I had never met. Keys can be copied. A gaze cannot. Elodie's was original. She touched the notebook, the envelope, paused at a photograph of a man near a gate that did not exist on any public map. She put a small cassette inside me and whispered, "Guard this better than him." Her lipstick left a curved mark on my leather like a passport stamp from a country that only opens at midnight. I traveled more than most saints and sinned by knowing. Hotel rooms learned my weight. Customs officers learned my face. In Prague, a waiter wrote a coup number on a napkin and folded it into a cigarette case that folded into me. In Warsaw, a woman cried into my stitching, then wiped her eyes and slipped me a list of names that were also calendar dates. Photographs made the inside of me colder. Men in overcoats stood in alleys with expressions like emptied wallets. A bridge reflected itself in a river the way a lie reflects a wish. The envelope multiplied. The notebook thickened with pages dense as guilt. There are different kinds of secrets. Some glitter when the light hits them. Others hum. The cassette hummed, not with sound but with potential. I sensed it most when planes took off and the world turned to engine and cloud. Andrus never listened to the tape. He weighed it in his palm once and put it back with the tenderness people reserve for regrets that haven't happened yet. In Rome, a man with diplomat plates followed us to a café where tourists learned to mispronounce coffee. He wore his suit like a uniform and his smile like a lie he loved. He sat behind us, ordered nothing, stared at the back of Andrus's head as if trying to read the thoughts printed there. Elodie joined later, not looking at the man, which is how you look at someone when you want them to follow. Night turned the city into lacquer. In the hotel elevator, 3 floors from the lobby, the power flickered. We stopped between. A breath, too, then the lights returned. In that darkness, I felt a hand not Andrus's slide along my side and test the lock. The elevator resumed, and we resumed pretending nothing had happened. Maps live inside people. They think they can fold them. In Athens, we played tourists long enough to take a picture on the steps every other picture had used. We left the camera in the room and returned to find the bed made, the curtains drawn tighter, the ashtray emptied of a cigarette no one had smoked. Housekeeping visits with a lockpick are called courtesy. Andrus checked me first. I was intact. A lock is a performance, and that day I performed well. He smiled without, the part of a smile that moves the eyes, and went to dinner with Elodie. Wow. I stayed to listen to a room hold its breath. The cassette became a gravity. It altered trajectories. In London, a man with a scar, shaped like a misplaced comma, asked for a light and handed Andrus a matchbook instead. Inside, a key. Not for me. Keys can be for doors, boxes, lockers, entire days. This one tasted like railway air. We went to a station you enter sideways, to a locker that had been painted over and repainted and still remembered its first color. The key fit the way apologies fit after years, stiff then smooth. Inside the locker, an envelope, and inside that, photographs of a meeting room whose windows looked out on a statue that had been removed the year before. The past in those photos made the present sweat. Andrus did not talk in the taxi. Elodie did not come with us that night. An absence sat between us like a third passenger. By the time Snow returned to Budapest, I had learned to hate mirrors. Hotel mirrors show you who's there to leave. Andrus looked, older by decisions made at 4, .m. He developed the habit of reading while standing, as if sitting would admit fatigue. He kept the cassette and the notebook, always together, always near me, as if proximity could domesticate danger. It cannot. Danger is a feral animal. It eats from your hand until it eats your hand. The night before Christmas, a bell rang that did not belong in our hallway. Andrus opened the door to a boy in a wool cap carrying a parcel wrapped in brown paper. No return address, only a string tied wrong a sailor's knot, attempted by someone who had never seen the sea. Inside the paper, a smaller package. Inside that, a note with 4 words. What you missed, listen. And a second cassette. I felt the air change, the way air changes when thunder has been mailed ahead of the storm. He did not listen then. He put both tapes inside me, closed my mouth gently, and locked it with the same ritual he used for crossing himself at childhood altars. We left Budapest on a train full of people taking gifts to people they owed. In our compartment, a woman hummed a lullaby to a child who preferred the window. Andrus pretended to sleep and watched his reflection instead. At the border, the guard smiled because he had been trained to. He moved the curtain with 2 fingers, as if the night outside might be smugglers. He stamped passports with a sound that says, "You belong," and sometimes means, "You do not." Evening in Vienna again. A hotel that thought it could imitate memory with wallpaper. A knock, not like death this time, but like etiquette. Andres opened the door to a man he called by the wrong name. The man accepted the wrong name as if it were his. He wore gloves even inside, and when he shook hands, the gesture ended 1 inch before touch. They spoke quickly. The notebook came out, then went back in. The tapes stayed with me, because some things you carry only if you believe you will arrive. The man left his scent behind, peppermint over metal. When the door closed, Andres leaned against it, slid down to the carpet, and laughed without humor until breathing again sounded like permission. I waited on the table and counted the seconds by the way the radiator sighed. Elodie arrived a few minutes later, her hair holding the snow as if it were decoration. She did not kiss him. She closed the curtains, turned on the radio to drown the room in other people's lives, and said, "You have to choose." He answered. "I already did," she answered. "Not between countries." She placed her hand on me. Between truth and survival. He unlocked me. The tapes looked smaller than threats should. He picked one up and then the other, weighing one against the other like a judge with 2 verdicts. "Which first?" he asked, and I realized he was asking me. Suitcases do not speak, except when they do. I did not answer. He chose the one without the note, slid it into a small player, pressed play, and gave silence its last chance to remain innocent. The tape did not begin with voices. It began with a room, footsteps, the clink of a glass, paper sliding across wood, a chair drawn back, a door opening to a phrase in Russian, then closing on a German apology, then opening again to French laughter that recognized no borders. After a minute, a voice that belonged to someone we had not yet met said in English, calm as a surgeon, "Begin the rehearsal." That was the moment I knew. What I carried was not a secret from the past. It was a blueprint for something that had not yet happened, and someone had rehearsed it many times. The tape ended with a click that sounded like a coffin lid. Andres sat still, the player whirring softly as if begging to rewind the world. Elodie didn't move. She watched him like a gambler watching a losing hand. Her silence said more than any accusation. He slipped the tape back into me, his fingers trembling. I felt the weight differently now, not just paper, not just plastic. It was prophecy, compressed into magnetic dust. My seams tightened as if they too feared the future. Elodie leaned close. "You understand now, don't you?" she whispered. Her French vowels curved like daggers. "This isn't about countries. It's about survival." Andres closed me, locked me, and stood. Survival for who? For us, for whoever pays attention. And if I don't play along, then you'll be history. And not the kind that makes books. The shadow at the station. We left Vienna 2 days later, heading toward Prague. Snow thickened along the tracks, swallowing villages into white silence. In the compartment, Andres smoked endlessly, staring at his reflection in the glass. I lay on the rack above, listening to the rhythm of the train. Elodie hummed softly, a melody that tried to disguise tension as calm. At Dresden station, a man boarded. He wore a gray wool coat and carried no luggage. That was the first warning. Travelers always carry burdens. Men without baggage carry intent. He sat 3 rows behind, his eyes on us, pretending to read a newspaper. When the conductor passed, he flashed a document too quickly, too confidently. Andres noticed. I felt his hand on my handle, tightening. He knew. We all knew. That night, in the Prague hotel, Andres checked the lock 3 times. Elodie checked only once. She trusted other methods. When Andres went to wash his face, she opened the curtains just a crack. Across the street, the man from the train stood in the shadows, smoking. He wasn't watching the hotel. He was watching our window. The switch. Morning smelled of coal and suspicion. We were due at a consulate meeting, but Andres insisted on leaving early. He packed quickly, stuffing clothes around me, trying to make me look ordinary. But secrets are never ordinary, and I felt the weight of the tapes like lead buried in silk. In the lobby, a bellboy approached. Too eager, too polite. He reached for me, offering to carry me down the steps. Andres snapped. No. The boy stepped back, eyes flicking to the man in the gray coat waiting near the door. Outside, the car idled. A driver in a cap tapped the wheel. Andres hesitated, then loaded me in himself. But I knew something was wrong. The driver never asked for a destination. He simply pulled away, merging into traffic like a leaf caught in a current. Elodie glanced at Andres. Their silence was an argument louder than words. Andres finally leaned forward. Where are you taking us? The driver didn't answer. At the next corner, another car slid behind us. Black, windows tinted. I felt the vibration of engines, the hum of pursuit. My brass corners rattled against the floorboard as if warning. This is not routine. The betrayal. We stopped near the Charles Bridge, where tourists fed pigeons that didn't care about politics. The driver opened the door, gesturing. Out? Andres refused. He clutched me tighter. Not here. Elodie put a hand on his arm. Do it, please. Her voice cracked, but not with fear, with decision. That was when I realized she had known. She had arranged this. The man in the gray coat stepped out of the other car. He wasn't holding a gun, but he didn't need to. His presence was weapon enough. Andres, Elodie said softly, give them the notebook. Keep the rest. No one has to get hurt. His jaw clenched. He looked at her as though he'd seen her for the first time, not as a lover, not as a partner, but as a variable in an equation designed to fail. Slowly, he unlocked me, pulled out the black notebook bound with red string, and handed it over. The man in gray took it without thanks, slipped it under his coat, and nodded once. Transaction complete. He didn't even glance at the tapes. That, I understood, was a mistake. Because the notebook was dangerous? Yes, but the tapes? The tapes were worse. Escape. That night, Andres didn't sleep. He sat by the window, smoking, staring at the bridge. Elodie lay on the bed, her back turned. The space between them was an unspoken battlefield. At dawn, she was gone. No note, no trace, just the faint smell of her perfume clinging to the curtains. Andres searched the room once, then stopped. He knew better than to chase ghosts. He placed the tapes inside me, double-checked the lock, and whispered, "You're all I have left." But he was wrong. I wasn't all he had left. I was all anyone had left, because the rehearsal wasn't over. It was just beginning. We boarded the train to Warsaw, under a sky the color of gunmetal. Andres looked 10 years older than when I first met him. His hair had thinned at the temples. His eyes darted like a man reading invisible headlines. I sat on the rack above, heavy with tapes, heavy with silence. The compartment was empty at first, but trains never stay empty. At the next stop, 2 soldiers entered. They wore plain clothes, but their boots betrayed them. Soldiers always carry the sound of command, even in silence. They nodded politely, sat across, and pretended to nap. Their eyes stayed half open. Andres placed a hand on me, casual, as if smoothing his jacket. His fingers tapped once, twice, 3 times a code, or maybe just nerves. I wanted to tell him, they know. Suitcases can't speak, but we can ache. And I ached all the way to Warsaw. The sleeper car. That night, Andres tried to rest. The train rocked gently, the way lullabies lie. Outside, snow blurred villages into shadows. I felt him shifting, restless. At some point, he unlocked me, pulled out the second tape, the one marked by the cryptic note. "What you missed, listen." He hesitated, player in one hand, tape in the other. He didn't press play. Instead, he stared at it for so long, I thought he'd turned to stone. Finally, he slipped it back inside, as though even curiosity had become too dangerous. Moments later, the compartment door slid open. The two soldiers returned, pretending surprise. "Sorry, wrong cabin," one said in German. They left, but not before their eyes measured me. The interrogation. Warsaw greeted us with cold concrete and colder faces. At the hotel, Andres received a note slipped under the door. It had no greeting, no signature, only an address and a time. Midnight, he cursed under his breath. I had learned enough to know. Midnight is not for business. It's for ultimatums. At 11:45, we walked through alleys that smelled of coal smoke and rain. The address led to an abandoned warehouse. Inside, a single bulb hung from a chain, swinging in the draft. Men waited, 3 of them. Coats buttoned too high, hats too low. They demanded the tapes. Andres refused. They demanded again. He laughed, a hollow laugh, and said, "If I hand them over, you'll kill me. If I don't, you'll kill me slower." One of the men struck him across the face. Blood touched his lip. He spat, smiled red, and said, "Go to hell." They never looked at me, but I felt their hunger. Secrets have a scent, and I reeked of them. Still, Andres held on. They left him bruised but alive, a warning carved in silence. The woman returns. Back at the hotel, he collapsed on the bed. Minutes later, the door clicked. Elodie walked in, dressed in black this time, not red. Her eyes no longer stormed. They mourned. "Andres," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "You should have listened." He turned away. "I listened enough. You don't understand," she pressed. "They'll never stop. The tapes, they are not plans. They are rehearsals." He looked at her, confusion cracking into horror. "Rehearsals for what?" "For erasing cities," she said softly. "For making ghosts." She reached for me. For once, Andres didn't stop her. She unlocked me with that same mysterious key, pulled out one of the tapes, and pressed it to her chest. "If they succeed, no border will matter. No flag, no home." He sat up, bruised face lit by the flicker of the lamp. "Then why are you here?" "Because," she said, "I chose wrong. And I want one last chance to choose right." The last train out, we boarded another train, this time heading west. Not toward safety, toward exposure. Andres whispered the plan: to deliver the tapes to someone who could reveal the truth, someone beyond both East and West, a journalist, a man who believed in nothing but the weight of words. But shadows followed. In every station, I saw gray coats, black cars, eyes that never blinked. I felt the chase in my hinges, in my brass corners. On the third night, the train slowed near a border crossing. Soldiers boarded, checking papers, checking luggage. When they reached us, one lifted me. His hands weighed me, suspicion rising. He tapped my lock, smiled coldly, and said, "Heavy for clothes." Andres forced a laugh. "I like to travel prepared." The soldier's smile lingered too long. Then, with a shrug, he set me down and moved on. But I knew. We had run out of borrowed time. The hook. By dawn, Andres sat hunched over, eyes hollow. Elodie leaned against the window, tears streaking silently. Between them, I lay on the floor, heavy with the future. Inside me were 2 tapes. One already terrifying, the other still unheard. And I knew this. Whatever was recorded, it wasn't just evidence. It was instruction. And soon someone would kill to follow it. And if we failed to deliver it, Millions might die, never knowing why. Morning bled into the carriage like a rumor. The train slid west, the sky the color of old film, and everyone pretended to be ordinary. Ordinary breaks easier. Andrus sat with his coat collar up and his jaw down, eyes on the passing fields that kept failing to be safe. I lay at his boots, heavy not with clothes, but with futures. Elodie watched the window, as if it could answer for all the locked rooms we had left behind. We were headed toward a name that was not a place. Rook. He was a journalist in the sense a surgeon is a man with a knife. People said he wrote with facts sharp enough to cut lies out of the body of the world. People also said he had no home address, only deadlines. His letters to Andrus had been typed on a machine that misfired the letter E, as if truth itself stuttered in his hands. Rook had agreed to meet in a neutral city, where neutrality had long ago been auctioned. Zurich. Between us and that meeting lay borders, questions, and the kind of men who carry yes or no inside their pockets like metal. The conductor moved through the corridor, punching holes into time. Papers, please. Papers again. Papers until the notion of identity felt like a coat worn under a coat. The soldiers who had napped with their eyes open the night before were gone, replaced by two officials whose smiles had learned discipline. They lifted my handle as though greeting an old friend and set me down, with a thud that measured more than leather. Heavy, one observed. He travels prepared, the other answered. They moved on, but their attention stayed with us like a draft under a door. At the next junction, the train stalled. An announcement apologized in 3 languages and told the truth in none. Passengers sighed with the practiced elegance of people whose lives are organized by schedules. A woman in a green scarf ate an orange and read a novel about love occurring where trains do not stop. A child counted the carriages and miscounted hope. Somewhere near the dining car, a bottle broke and laughter covered for it with music. Change cars, Elodie whispered without moving her lips. Now, Andrus waited 1 beat too, long the beat that separates caution from story, and then rose, took my handle, and stepped into the aisle. The corridor was a hall of mirrors flashing coats, elbows, a silver service cart, conversation clipped into postcards. I felt the decision in his grip. Not flight, not fight, but friction enough resistance to look like coincidence. We slipped through 2 doors, then another, our reflections following like witnesses. When we reached the junction between carriages, wind tore at the seals, and the noise of speed made conversation, a sculptor working with hammers. Which compartment? He asked. The one we didn't book, she said. Luck favors the uninvited. We entered a second-class cabin where a priest snored gently. A student drew maps in a notebook, and a man with farmer's hands counted coins by touch. No one looked up. That is a kind of mercy. Andrus set me beneath the seat and exhaled a breath he hadn't earned. Elodie closed her eyes and let the train carry, her face somewhere calmer than the present. It would have held our little illusion, if not for the smell of peppermint metal. I knew it before he appeared, the way I sometimes know when a key is going to fail, a hint that doesn't belong to air. The man with the gray coat passed the door once, then again, not looking in. He was measuring. On his 3rd pass, the priest stirred. The student coughed. The farmer stacked his coins into a tower that wanted to fall. The gray coat continued down the corridor, as if forgetting us on purpose. 3 stops, Elodie said. We get off at the 4th. The train moved again. Snow retired from the fields, revealing the posture of winter, stubborn and economic. I felt the tapes inside me settle, as if adopting the discipline of soldiers. There are objects that prefer stillness. These were not among them. They wanted to be heard. They wanted to finish rehearsals. At the 4th stop, the platform was a momentary village born of momentum. People with bags, people with reasons, people with faces that could be passports or masks. We stepped down into air that corrected posture. A clock on the station wall told a version of truth that agreed with no watch. Andres scanned for exits like a man searching his own handwriting. Elodie walked, not fast, not slow, the speed of someone who refuses to be followed and knows better. We did not see the boy until he had already taken us. He was 12, perhaps, with a red wool cap and the gift of appearing where the eye expects nothing. He tugged Andres's sleeve, wide-eyed with an emergency too small to question. "Sir," he said in German, "your briefcase, someone opened it." He pointed behind us. There was no briefcase. There was no someone. But distraction is the oldest technology. When Andres turned, the boy's other hand withdrew not from a pocket, but from me. A click, so small it could have been a prayer. He ran, the farmer's hands from our compartment, tried to catch him, and gave him a blessing instead. Andres chased, and for a moment the world remembered it had been built for legs. The platform narrowed, a whistle drew a line across the air, and a freight carriage slid like a black thought between pursuer and pursued. The boy ducked under a chain and vanished into a crowd that had not existed a second earlier. And then the peppermint metal arrived, taking up space without occupying it. "Lost something?" The man in gray asked, voice soft enough to pass for weather. "Only time," Andres said. He set me down beside his leg, and I felt the tremor he couldn't afford. "Your destination?" The man asked. "Forward," Andres answered, comma. The man smiled, but the smile stayed in his mouth as if suspected of treason. "I, too, prefer forward," he said, and walked away, leaving the scent behind like a note under a door. We reboarded the train 2 carriages deeper than before. Only then did Andres kneel, palm to leather, breath shallow. "Did he take it?" Elodie asked. He unlocked me a ritual, then an act. Inside, the notebook was long gone. The envelopes counted themselves. The photographs stared up like arguments. The first tape lay where we had left it, heavy as verdict. The second, the one with the note, was not where memory insisted it should be. For a full second, silence changed temperature. Then his fingers found it, displaced along the scene, pressed flat under a shirt that still smelled of a city we hadn't forgiven. He closed his eyes, opened them, and nodded once. "Still with us?" "Not for long," Elodie said. "We need to change trains." "Again?" "Again," she said. "Chasing is a language. We must answer in dialect." We shifted at the next station to a local line that considered punctuality an opinion. Wooden benches replaced upholstered privacy. A vendor moved through with tea that smelled like the memory of summer. The train rattled honest sounds. Children stared at my brass corners and asked who I belonged to in a chorus of small jurisdictions. "To the man," one girl decided. "To the woman," said another. "To the story," said the boy who would later grow into someone dangerous or kind, depending on a sentence he had not yet heard. Near dusk, we reached a border that wore its authority like an inheritance. Casually, but with weight. Guards checked the carriages with the bored cruelty of routine. Passports marched from pocket to pocket. A dog with professional dignity sniffed bags until dignity yielded to fatigue. When the officer's hand met my handle, it lingered. He lifted me onto the aisle and rapped the lid with his knuckles. A doctor interrogating loan. "Open," he said. Andres looked at Elodie. Something traveled between their eyes that could have been trust in a braver story. He took out the key. "Random check," the officer added. Always the funniest line in any play. The key turned. My mouth unlatched. The tapes lay an inch from discovery, disguised by the indifference of shirts. Andres reached for a stack of papers on top tickets, receipts, letters that looked tired of representing themselves. He lifted them and paused, as if remembering a technique taught long ago, in a room where men practiced. patience for sport. He smiled at the officer and said, "Be careful the latch sticks," then let the lid fall a fraction, catching the officer's hand before it settled. The man jerked back, a reflex older than Borders. Andrus apologized with humiliation so perfect it could only be sincere. The officer waved him on, nursing pride with the same hand that might have found the future. We were allowed to pass because a finger had been pinched. On the far side, the landscape changed its accent. Hills took the place of fields. The stations wore their names like secrets. Andrus exhaled a sound that might have been a laugh if laughter had not been conscripted. "Zurich by morning," he said. "Assuming morning arrives," Elodie replied. "Night says yes to plans and day edits them." In the darkness, the compartment belonged to the rustle of coats and the punctuation of rails. Andrus slept badly, the way a man does when dreams keep poor records. Elodie watched the window until her reflection learned endurance. I lay at their feet and listened to time formatting itself into hours. Somewhere behind us, Peppermint Metal. Near midnight, the train braked without warning. Not a stop in argument with physics. The lights flickered, recovered, and agreed to be dimmer. A voice on the intercom performed, reassurance with an accent more honest than the words. Down the corridor, doors opened, closed, didn't. Steps approached, reseated, returned. A shadow paused at our threshold, long enough to learn our breathing. "Andrus," Elodie whispered, not his name but a verdict. He was already awake. His hand found my handle, and in that contact I felt a vow. If I had to be shield, I would be shield. If vault, vault. If coffin, then with witnesses. The door slid open. The man in gray filled the doorway, like a clause you cannot edit out. He did not step in. He did not smile. He said, "Let's take a walk," and moved aside to allow a choice to pretend itself. Andrus stood, lifted me, and in the act of standing, made a decision that would alter more than geography. We stepped into the corridor where night had stored its intentions. The carriage swayed, the coupling sighed, and far below us, the tracks wrote parallel lines that promised never to meet. Zurich wore its winter like a tailored suit. The streets were too clean, the trams too punctual, the people too polite to notice the shadows that stalked them. But shadows walked anyway, and we carried two of them inside me-tapes that had become heavier than gold. Andrus stepped off the train with the stiffness of a man who had aged on the rails. Elodie walked beside him, her face carved into calm, but her eyes kept mapping every rooftop, every alley mouth. I rolled at his side, brass corners flashing under the gray sky like quiet signals. We were supposed to meet Rook at Café Adler, an ordinary place with extraordinary patrons. Journalists, bankers, ghosts in trench coats all blended under the smell of roasted beans and damp wool. Rook was already there. He was smaller than rumors made him, wiry, his hair retreating like a guilty soldier, but his eyes sharp, restless, constantly writing sentences no one else could hear. He didn't shake hands. He looked at me first, then at Andrus. "You brought it," he said. Not a question. Andrus nodded. 2 tapes. 1 notebook lost. Rook's mouth twitched. Then the clock ticks faster than I hoped. The exchange. We sat in the back corner. A waitress brought coffee, but no one drank. Rook leaned close. "These tapes, you understand what they are?" "Evidence," Andrus said. "Not just evidence," Rook corrected. "Blueprints, timetables. If they succeed, cities will disappear before the news can even print headlines." He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside, forged documents, travel permits, escape routes drawn in shorthand. "You get these to safety," Rook whispered, "and I get the tapes. The world gets the truth." Andrus hesitated. His hand hovered over me, then pulled back. "Once I give them to you, I lose leverage. And leverage is all I have left." Rook's voice hardened. "Leverage won't stop them. Exposure might. Elodie spoke at last. And what if exposure kills him before it saves anyone? Rook looked at her, unblinking. Then at least he dies for something larger than survival. The ambush. The cafe door opened with the quietest bell in the world. Too quiet. 3 men entered, each in plain coats, each carrying themselves like they'd rehearsed every step. One went to the counter. One took a seat by the window. One headed straight for us. Andrus gripped my handle. "Not here," he muttered. Rook's eyes darted. Too late. The man reached the table, smiled politely, and spoke in German. "Papers, please." Random check. The cruelest phrase in Europe. Andrus froze. Elodie shifted, her hand brushing her coat pocket. Rook whispered, "Don't." Too many eyes. The man's gaze fell on me. He tapped my lid lightly, as if knocking on a coffin. "And this?" "A suitcase," Andrus said flatly. The man's smile widened. "A suitcase that travels too far, too often. Perhaps it has stories to tell." He reached for the lock. Andrus's hand shot out, gripping the suitcase tighter. For one heartbeat, silence held the room. The clatter of cups, the murmur of strangers all faded. Then Elodie spoke, smooth as silk. "Of course. Let me help." She pulled a small key from her purse, the same key she had used in Paris. Andrus's eyes flared with betrayal. "Not here," he hissed, but it was too late. She had already slid the key toward the man. The shot, the lock clicked open. The man leaned closer, ready to peel away secrets. His shadow fell across the table, across me, and then the window shattered. A shot cracked through glass and bone. The man collapsed forward, dead before his face hit the table. His blood soaked into the wood, creeping toward my brass corners. Chaos erupted. Screams, chairs crashing, waiters diving for cover. The other 2 men drew pistols, firing blindly. Patrons ducked under tables. Someone shouted for police. Rook grabbed me, dragging me across the floor. Andrus stumbled after him. Elodie's hand was already on a weapon of her own, firing back with the precision of someone who had practiced far too often. We burst through the back door into an alley, reeking of smoke and fear. Snowflakes drifted down, catching in blood on Rook's sleeve. He was laughing, half mad, half triumphant. "See?" he shouted over the chaos. "Now you understand. They'll kill everyone to bury this. Everyone." Andrus wheezed, holding his side. Then we ran faster. The loss, we didn't stop running until the city blurred behind us. A stolen car carried us out, its engine coughing, its tires screaming against cobblestones. Rook clutched me tight, muttering to himself, words spilling like ink. At the safe house on the edge of the city, he finally set me down. His hands shook as he opened me. Inside papers, photographs, and the 2 tapes. He lifted one, kissed it like scripture. Then his face changed. His hands dug deeper, frantic. 1 tape, 2 tapes. No, only 1. Andrus froze. "What?" Rook's voice cracked. "Where's the second?" Silence spread. Elodie's face went pale. "It was there," she whispered, "but it wasn't. Somewhere between the cafe and the alley, between blood and broken glass, one of the tapes had vanished. I felt emptier than I had ever felt. A suitcase can lose weight, yes, but losing a secret is worse. It is losing purpose." Andrus slammed me shut. "Then someone has it." Rook looked at him with terror disguised as fury. "Then the rehearsal is already becoming the performance." The safe house smelled of mold and desperation. Its walls were plastered with old newspapers, headlines screaming about wars that never ended. Rook paced the floor like a wolf in too small a cage. Andrus sat hunched, a hand pressed to his ribs where bruises bloomed like dark flowers. Elodie leaned against the window, eyes fixed on the street below, as if expecting betrayal to arrive on schedule, and I sat on the table, lighter by one tape. Too light. Emptiness rang inside me like an unanswered phone. Rook snapped. One tape is not enough. With both, I could prove everything. With one, his voice cracked. With one, they'll call me a liar, a lunatic, a traitor. Andrus's voice was gravel. Then we find the second. Do you know who has it? Rook barked. Andrus shook his head slowly. No, but I know who will use it. Elodie finally spoke. Her voice was low, dangerous. It doesn't matter who holds it. Once it plays, the world changes. The message. That night, Rook set up an old tape player. We can't sit on silence, he said. We listen. We decide. Then we act. The tape hissed to life. Voices emerged, distorted, overlapping. Russian, German, English. Plans whispered like prayers. Coordinates spoken as if they were poetry. A date repeated again and again. A city's name blurred, but unmistakable. And then, laughter. Cold, rehearsed too many times. Andrus gripped the arm of his chair. My God, they're not planning. They're practicing. Elodie crossed her arms. And we are running out of time. Rook pressed stop. We need to get this out broadcasted, printed, anything. Once the world knows, the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed the room, the firefight. Bullets shattered the window before the glass hit the floor. The air exploded with gunfire. Shadows poured in through the door like floodwater. Andrus shoved me off the table, dragging me to his chest. Elodie fired back, her pistol barking flame. Rook dove for the tape, clutching it to his chest like a dying man clutching faith. The room became chaos. Smoke, shouting, boots pounding the stairs. Someone screamed in German. Someone else answered in Russian. I felt hands tugging at me, pulling, tearing. Every side wanted me, because I was no longer a suitcase. I was proof, and then came the moment that burned itself into my seams forever. Rook fell. A bullet caught him in the throat. He dropped, choking, his eyes wide with the terror of a man who realized too late he had written his last word. The tape slipped from his hand and skittered across the floor. Elodie grabbed it. She spun, firing, blood streaking her cheek. She shoved the tape inside me, slammed me shut, locked me. Keep it safe, she hissed. Her eyes met Andrus's for a heartbeat. There was history in that look, love, betrayal, regret, all tangled. Then another bullet shattered the moment. She crumpled beside Rook, her hand slipping from my handle. Andrus howled rage, grief, defiance all at once. He kicked the table into the attackers, fired the pistol until it clicked empty, and grabbed me and ran. Down the stairs, through smoke and blood, into the freezing night. The city blurred. Sirens wailed. Snow turned pink where bodies fell. Andrus stumbled through alleys, slipping, gasping, dragging me as if I weighed nothing and everything. At last he collapsed against a stone wall, chest heaving. His hands bled, his coat torn. But he still had me. He unlocked me, checked inside. The tape was there. One tape, the other was gone. He whispered through cracked lips. Half a truth is still a weapon. Then he laughed a broken, hollow sound and pressed his forehead against my leather. But who do I give it to, now that everyone who wanted the truth is dead? Dawn broke over Zurich like a lie told too late. Andrus sat alone in a city that had no safe corners. In his hands, me. Inside me, one tape evidence that could ignite or prevent catastrophe. But the second tape was missing. Someone else had it. Someone who wouldn't hesitate to use it. And as the sun rose, Andrus whispered the only truth left. This is no longer about survival. This is about the end of everything. And I, the suitcase, knew. The rehearsal was over. The performance had begun.